And it wasn't very long before, a lot of those things fell by the wayside. So I'll see what happens. The other main problem I have with the Tea Party is I went and gave a talk to the Tea Party convention in Cincinnati last April 15th, 2010, and when I was there, so it was in Fifth Third Arena, so there was thousands of people going in, and before the show started, they up on the scoreboard there, they were like showing a slideshow, like a PowerPoint slideshow of different pictures, photos. And when they would show Barack Obama and the crowd would boo. Okay, they would show Nancy Pelosi and the crowd would really boo. And then they showed Ron Paul, and there wasn't much of a reaction. I think it was just because the people in the photo didn't recognize who he was. He was kind of in the back.
That's
okay, but that's fair enough.
Sure.
But then they showed a photo of George W. Bush and Dick Cheney waving, and the crowd went nuts with applause.
Wow.
And it really, I mean, not you even put aside issue of foreign policy, whether you agree with that or not, but the Tea Party, the one thing that they're supposed to be against is big government spending and bailouts, and those both happened under the Bush administration.
Absolutely.
The TARP bailout was not Obama's policy; it was Bush's. So it's so that kind of thing makes me not so sure that so let me put it to you this way: if John McCain had won in 2008, I don't know that the Tea Party would have been so energetic as they were against Barack Obama, even though I think a McCain presidency would have been very similar to an Obama one.
So it is a bandwagon of sorts, and so now it's okay. Put your money where your mouth is. Right,
and again, I don't mean to impugn everybody. I think the Tea Party is attracting lots of people, and so there are some that are really non-ideological. It's not that they care about Republicans or Democrats. They really just realize, holy cow, this government's out of control. And so I'm trying to, that's partly why I participated in that event, is because I knew there were people like that I wanted to reach with my message. But again, I think you're right that I think some Republican strategists realize, well, we got to get on this wave and let's ride this thing on this anti-Obama message and use the Tea Party as a way to get elected.
Got it. Well, some other things that have happened, obviously, is you had QE2, and obviously we could probably dedicate a whole podcast to that. But looking at potentially, some inclination that we'll have a little bit more transparency with the Fed was, some action there where they had to be, transparent to an extent as far as some of their activity during the 2008-2009 crisis. So, what do you think that's a step in the right direction?
About the transparency?
Yeah,
definitely. I mean, that's probably one of the few good things that came out of the financial regulation reforms, as they call them, that with this increased disclosure, that actually the Federal Reserve had to do that stuff as well. So yeah, on December 1st, they had this big dump of all the December 1st, 2010. They had this big dump of all the transactions the Fed had been doing since the crisis began. And you're right, we learned a bunch of stuff that we suspected, but that we didn't know the actual details. Like, for example, Goldman Sachs, in order to get away from the limits imposed on bonuses or compensation they could pay to their executives, they paid back their TARP loan. And and so people at the time were saying, oh wow, look at this, that was a good investment the government made into Goldman Sachs, and they paid it off because the economy is improving, blah blah blah. And it turned out that that Goldman got the money to pay back the TARP loan from the Fed, I think like the day before, or within the week before. It might have literally have been the day before.
Yeah.
That the Federal Reserve, behind closed doors, back door, gives Goldman Sachs billions of dollars, and then they pay off the federal government. And then now Goldman can do whatever it wants because it paid off its loan with money the Fed gave it. So there was lots of funny things like that going on. But to answer your question, yeah, of course, the more disclosure we have about what the Fed is doing, the better it is. It sort of limits what they can do. I mean, when you think about what Ben Bernanke's official position was, he was literally giving out hundreds of billions of dollars when the crisis really set in the last part of 2008 there. Congress calls him before them and said, Chairman Bernanke, we're not second-guessing your decisions as to what you think the economy needs, but can you at least tell us which firms are getting how much money from you behind closed doors? And he said, well, no, I can't tell you that because that would defeat the purpose of the program. If investors knew that a particular bank needed $10 billion from us, then, they'd short their stock and so forth. So I mean, now, if you just are watching the news or something, that sounds like, oh, okay, that makes sense, and you go and flip it and go watch baseball or something. But if you just think about that, that's astounding. That here's this guy, that Ben Bernanke, that can create hundreds of billions of dollars just, pressing a button and then give it to various people and not even have to tell Congress who he's giving it to. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah. Well, I think that, again, as you said, it's a step in the right direction. And hopefully that leads to more transparency, more accountability, and then obviously individuals can see the writing on the wall and recognize how destructive that type of central banking system is to an economy. So
yeah, right. And the thing, this is really, I think, a good example of the difference between Austrian economics and some other schools of thought, because a lot of times people say, what's the big deal? Why do you stress that you're an Austrian economist? Why don't you just say you're a free market kind of guy? What's the difference between you guys and like Chicago school economists? And this is one area where that difference really is illuminated, is that Austrians had this. They focus a lot on the capital structure of the economy. So like the various physical machines and the various stages of production, so that it's not just, oh, you've got labor and capital, and they just mix together, and boom, you get your output, the way it would be in the models of other schools of thought. The Austrians focus a lot more on the fact that, well, no, I mean, you've got various stages of production, like a given television set, for example. If you follow its life cycle back to its individual components, I mean, it takes a while to build a television set. If you followed it back and looked at all the pieces and where they come from, there'd be resources from all over the world ultimately being harvested or mined or what have you to ultimately go into the production of just a television set.
Just the iPencil concept.
Yeah. And so, when you start realizing that, that's when you understand that the problem with what the Fed is doing with QE2 and all this stuff, it's not simply that, there might be price inflation 2 years from now, which is what a lot of the sort of monetarist critics point out. So the people who are opposed to what the Fed is doing, who aren't Austrians, usually their big complaint is just that, this is going to cause inflation, by which they mean, rising prices. But the Austrians realize, well, no, there's a lot more than just that. It doesn't, the fact that interest rates have been 0% for the last year and a half, or short-term interest rates, I mean, that screws things up. Interest rates are prices that direct production and direct entrepreneurs, and if you set the wrong interest rate, that's going to screw things up. So that's really a good example. Or if Ben Bernanke behind the scenes is bailing out people who are his buddies, I mean, that messes up the market process. That means firms that were supposed to fail now aren't failing, and resources are getting locked into channels where they shouldn't be. So that's sort of understanding just the true harm of what the Fed's been doing. I think it takes Austrian economics to really explain that.
So do you think, and obviously it's artificial at best, but do you think that a lot of their activity is what has led to a relatively strong 2010?
Oh, definitely. It's I think that by some measures, right now people are thinking, we're coming out of this recession. And if you look, for example, at the stock market, it was tanking until about March 2009, and then it starts zooming back up. And that was right when the first round of quantitative easing was announced. And then also, the connection wasn't as clear this time around, but basically in the summer, I think it was around July and then August for sure, is when people on Wall Street really started expecting that in the November meeting of 2010 that the Fed was going to announce a second round of quantitative easing. And then you saw again the stock markets start soaring from the summer once that expectation set in. So it's a very crude thing, but yeah, when the Federal Reserve prints up a bunch of money and hands it out primarily to players in the financial sector, you're going to see, on paper at least, it looking like the economy's improving in terms of the stock market and things like that. And then even other conventional indicators can go up in the short term, because my opinion is right now we're experiencing, this is the boom period for this particular part of our cycle. Now, the reason it doesn't feel like it's prosperity is just because we were starting at such an awful low spot.
Yeah.
And so just the same way that Alan Greenspan, after the dot-com crash, he brought interest rates way down and fueled the housing bubble. And people at the time were calling him the maestro and were saying, this is great that, that he pulled the economy out of the doldrums from what should have been an awful recession after the dot-com crash. And then, of course, once housing crashed, we realized, oh, wait a minute, maybe Greenspan wasn't really doing us any favors. So I think it's the same thing here, that the economy after the housing crash should have had a major recession. It probably would have been an awful year or so, and then we would have been on the road to a solid recovery. But instead of that,
we're kicking the can and deferring the inevitable.
Right. Bernanke brings interest rates down to even lower than Greenspan did and pumps in a bunch more money than Greenspan did. So yeah, I don't think that the economy is finally turning the corner, and I do think that even though this is lackluster as this recovery is, and I'm putting recovery in quotation marks, I think, yeah, this is largely driven just by the Fed creating over $1 trillion and dumping it in the economy.
So I think that now what's become a leading indicator as far as consumer sentiment is the balance of their retirement account. And that's all subject to what's going on in the market. And so the artificial injection of money and the subsequent increases in the markets is what's getting people to be more comfortable with what's going on. So do you see maybe a similar type of increase in 2011, or do you think this is going to be a short-lived bubble with a subsequent bust?
Well, it's, of course, always risky to put a time frame on something, because then you could possibly be proven wrong, right? So I should acknowledge that I have been worried about rising consumer prices ever since Bernanke started this, what I consider to be mad policy. And so far, those fears, you see it in gas prices and food prices, but obviously it's not like milk is $10 a gallon or anything right now. Yeah. And so, I don't want to come off as Chicken Little here, but I do think that you're right, that it's the reason people are starting to relax is because they were terrified when their 401ks dropped 40%, and when the crisis first set in, and then now that the stock market has regained a lot of that territory, and I think people clammed up, they built up their cash reserves, a lot of businesses did, but at some point they figure, okay, well, how much cash are we going to accumulate, and then they're going to start lending again. So I don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but I think what eventually will happen is that, let's say within the next 3 years, I believe this would occur, is you're eventually, the fact that they've printed all this money, you're going to see long-term interest rates start rising, right, because of inflation expectations. And then that's really going to be when the rubber hits the road, because there's all this money sitting in the banks and not trickling out into the economy, because right now, what's the incentive for a bank to lend the money? Because the businesses are still risky, their balance sheets are still shot, and the interest rates are so low. They might as well just keep the money parked at the Fed, which is what they've largely been doing. But once people start thinking, oh no, okay, we're back into a regular economy now, they're going to start lending that out, and then Bernanke's going to have to either let it happen and let the money supply really flow into the economy and push up prices, or he's going to have to suck it out and crash the economy again. And
it's interesting that you make, and I know obviously you're not going to you're not a prophet as far as what markets are going to do, but that 3 year, 4 year, 5 year window, there's kind of some fuel to the fire with a very large, relatively speaking, population that's going to be subject to required minimum distributions of their qualified plan. And so with baby boomers with 3 to 4 times the population size as the succeeding generations, all the money that they were putting in during the late 70s, early 80s, and in the 90s is now going to start coming back. So obviously you have interest rates, long-term interest rates going up, but also you have money starting to trickle out of the market. Do you think that's going to also have a pretty negative impact on things?
Well, yeah, I do think that's certainly. I mean, I would need to go check the demographics again to see the exact timeline of that. But you're right. The fact that a lot of the money that's in Wall Street right now is because of people's 401ks and other qualified retirement plans. And yeah, as you mentioned, just legally to avoid penalties, people have to start taking distributions of that stuff. And just with the way the demographics work, if more people, in a sense, are retiring than new workers are funding their retirement, then there's going to be a net sale of assets there, and that's going to push down stock prices. So, I definitely think there's going to be that, and then also in conjunction with the trends I'm talking about. So, in other words, let me put it this way, I don't think that the stock market was correctly valued, let's say, at the end of 2007, and then the fall in 2008 was some aberration, and now things are going back to normal. No, I think that there was a huge bubble in the stock market,